I'm never about negativity or any of that. I'm like, okay, we're here. We're all here. This is where we are. What do we do? How do we change? That's
Yeah.
what the work of the Good of the Hive is about. And this mural, I think, exemplifies that. My whole thing with the Good of the Hive is that there's the piece of outreach of getting pollinators in the front of everybody's brain and then telling this story about how we might let pollinators change us for the better. But then there's also like the aspect of what I'm learning along the way and how am I changing personally as an artist to try and help share what I'm learning to tell an even better story.
Greetings and welcome to the Do Tell podcast, a podcast for lovers of great stories. Today we have a very special guest joining us on the show. Our guest is a very talented artist and muralist. He has painted many murals all over the United States and abroad, but most of his works are not just random subjects. He is on a mission to bring awareness to a very critical part of the ecosystem that has been threatened in the last few decades by a number of environmental factors. Our guest today is Matt Willey, who has been painting murals across the globe of honeybees and other pollinators. Matt has been beautifying local communities with these fabulous works of art, bringing a sense of wonder and pride to those cities and towns. But his work has a much more important goal. Through the scope and extent of his paintings, he has garnered worldwide attention to the plight of these vital contributors to the world's food supply and to the overall ecological health of the planet. We are delighted to have him on the podcast today to tell us more about this mission. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So first of all, we want to really dive into your mission here and what you're accomplishing and learn about your artwork and some of the paintings you've done. But I want to know about Matt. Tell our listeners about Matt. What's your background? How did you become an artist?
Sure. Yeah. My background includes art. My mom is an artist. And she just started me when I was really young. I grew up in the Boston area mostly. And
you don't have that Boston accent, Matt.
No, I don't actually. I was in the suburbs. I didn't get there till I was about 10, so maybe it didn't stick for that reason. But and thank goodness. I mean, I love my Boston friends, but
right.
like your voice gets there before you do when you have that accent. So but yeah, my mom started me. I always joke, like I didn't have a plan B from the time I was little. I was going to be an artist from the time I was a kid. And it really started, I can remember the magic of watching my mom draw something. And I just wanted to do that.
Was she a professional artist or
she wasn't, she never had to make a living at it, but she painted always. And
fantastic.
if I said, draw me a horse and I was little, she could actually draw a horse and it would look like a horse. And I was mystified by that skill.
Right.
Some kids are mystified by music or whatever it is, but I wanted to learn how to do that. And so, I was the youngest kid, so she wanted to paint and had more time because it was just me there or whatever. So she cut the legs off an easel and stood me there and said, "You're going to paint while I paint." And I think she was kind of amazed that I actually stood there doing it,
Right.
My mom was definitely my defender. My dad, he's awesome, but he was not a big fan of me becoming an artist. He's a businessman,
right.
like consummate business brain. Like this doesn't seem practical at all.
Right.
And my mother was like, he's doing this. It doesn't matter what you think, he's doing this.
That's great.
So yeah.
So many artists, musicians, have faced that challenge from the
I think it's good. I think it adds to the because you get out in the world and there's that kind of resistance anyway. So starting with your dad is a great place to begin with that. Okay, what do I really think? What do I really want to do with my life? I have to. That's always in a healthy situation. That's the first safe barrier to overcome. Right.
That's a good point. I'd never thought about that. That resistance can, like any kind of resistance, working out you're
Oh
they're
yeah, it
tearing
makes
down
things
your muscles
stronger
so
for
they build
sure.
back.
Yeah.
And so that I had never thought about it in that way. That's very profound, I think. So,
So that's it. And then I, went on to art school and the whole traditional
yeah.
route.
Where did you go to art
And
school?
I went to the museum school. Well, I started 2 years at Alfred University in Western New York, which I always like to give them a plug because that first year of their foundation program in problem solving visually and artistically, it was like boot camp every day. You'd have these incredible projects to teach you how to think and see like an artist. And I can attribute a lot of my ability to create a career doing this on that first year at Alfred.
Interesting. Yeah, great. So,
Mhm.
what about some of your other inspirations? Are there other artists that you really took a liking to and influenced your
I mean,
style and your career?
it's funny because I was thinking about this not too long ago. I was thinking like all my heroes as artists when I was young, they were so dark.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I like even like literally like Rembrandt,
Yeah.
like these
Yeah.
dark paintings and Van Gogh and Cézanne, and I loved the old masters,
Yeah.
that was those were my heroes. I read everything I could read about them. And it's funny because my work isn't really like that and never has been. My work has really been about light and connection, and a lot of it was interior mural stuff when I was younger, but it was always about positivity and um I'm surprised by that, but I was also just mystified by how friggin' good they were at what they did
It
and
was
how they,
almost, yeah. When you stand in
yeah,
front of the night watch, which I
yeah,
have several times, it's like looking at a photograph. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
and then I think the impressionists said, well, we can't beat that. So let's do
Yeah.
something completely different.
Let's
Let's mess it
react
up a
to
little
it. Yeah.
bit. So,
Yeah. I know. It's so funny. And those shifts and changes are so beautiful when you learn about them.
right.
I think that's, you know, a part of it is
Yeah.
really learning how to look and learning how to see and the history and all that is really important to me.
Yeah. I love the impressionists as well, but you say the old masters were just
Mm.
unbelievable. So okay. So you're painting on an easel when you're knee high to your mother.
hmm
Uh, I assume you're doing maybe watercolors or oil or
I was like
pastels,
acrylics back then, and then I
acrylics.
moved to oils in art school. And, I was going to be a figurative painter in art school. There was like, I got out of art school and had this portfolio of like purple and green figures.
Hmm.
It was like wild, and I had no idea what I was going to do for a living. Like
Yeah.
the dream is always, okay, you're going to submit to some galleries and they're going to like want to show your work. But what I was drawn to at the time wasn't something that was really being consumed by a consumer or collected. Like it just wasn't a thing, it was like
Yeah.
1993, and I and so I got out of art school and I ended up in Washington, D.C. And I was waiting on tables and I tell this story a lot actually. And I was I was standing there one night and I had this epiphany that if I don't do something quickly, I'm going to go my whole life and never make my paintings. Because I wasn't the type of person that, like, some people can do another job and then they do their work on the weekends or whatever. That was not me. I was getting in this cycle of like, go to work, sleep in, go to work, party, go to bed when the sun's coming up, sleep enough to go back to work. I was getting in that cycle and there was no painting happening. And I and it occurred to me that that cycle could easily continue for 30 years. And so I just quit my job. And I was like, okay, a friend of mine was like, well, you really should put up some of those signs so that people can see what you want to do. Like you remember They had the like phone numbers at the bottom. You'd see them at the grocery
Well,
store
you
before
could
the internet. You
tear
could
the
rip
little
off your
thing.
phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I put up signs all over DC saying, I'll teach a kid to paint. I'll paint your bathroom. I'll paint your hallway ceiling to look like the Sistine Chapel.
Oh,
I had
that's
no
good.
idea. Like I grabbed some images that I had, like maybe might apply to that. And one woman called me in took about 3, 4 days. And she called me and she said, I can't go anywhere in my neighborhood without seeing these flyers because um, and she's like, I got to meet you. And she ended up hiring me for, it's a longer story, but she hired me for one, like she tried me out on one little project. And from that one tiny project in her basement, um, she worked on the Hill, worked for Ted Kennedy, like through
Oh,
parties, like, and she just had a couple of homes. So she got me going initially on things. I painted her kids' rooms and it just all of a sudden I had a portfolio. So it took about 5 days to make the transition from not employed in art to employed in art. And I
yeah.
basically would paint anything anyone would ask me to. And I would go home, somebody would be like, can you do this? Whatever it was. And I was like, of course I can. And I'd go home and figure out how to do it and then go back. And that was everything from portraits of kids to portraits of adults or dogs or ceiling murals, everything you can think of.
Wow. Bold move, brave move. It's a scary thing to suddenly not have an income, but it motivated you to be creative and resourceful
Yeah.
so I think there's a real lesson in that story for our listeners to think
Yeah.
about.
And for me, if there's a lesson in it, it was my willingness, and this applies to the bees later too, was okay, I threw it out there to the universe. I did my part that I could do, which was, I mean, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing one of my flyers. Like I was putting them on nice cars. I was like putting them in the places that I thought people could afford to hire somebody,
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
and I
Yeah.
was like, I chose those neighborhoods because I was like, I need the money. So the people with the money and the four houses are probably the ones who are going to hire me. It was just logical. And so
Yeah.
I just did that piece, but I was willing to paint anything. I
Yeah.
didn't say no to anything in the first couple of years. I mean, I painted the Last Supper all as fruit and juice, like a banana. Jesus, I think, was a banana for a juice bar in
Oh
this
wow.
like neighborhood. Like I just did whatever anybody wanted,
Oh, I want to
sort
see
of like,
that. Is that still
yeah.
around? I want to see that.
It actually ended up in the Washington Post, but this was
Oh,
all prior to um like everything being digital and permanent. Like a lot of my work, I was digging for pictures of I ended up doing things like the space library at the Russian Cultural Center in
oh,
Washington, D.C. in the 90s. And Valentina Tereshkova came and unveiled it. I did another piece in the Russian Cultural Center that Mikhail Gorbachev came and unveiled. I have this great
oh,
picture of the two of us. But none of this was during the time of digital. There
right.
was no social media. So I was just like going from place to place doing my work, and people would hear about it because they'd see something on a magazine or a newspaper, and then someone would call me, and
Yeah.
I
And
loved
you
it.
didn't have a cell phone that they could call either. You had to be at
No,
home
and
to get those calls, didn't you?
totally. And computer, I didn't have a computer until I was 30. Like, imagine that,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I'm so grateful for that time period.
Yeah.
It
Wasn't,
just got to be mine. It was like the last of the old school. Like one of the things that I really wrestle with that I think is beautiful and challenging for artists is it's not enough to just make art anymore. You have to make art and capture it happening while it's happening. And for me, like, and it's been a challenge because immediately I'm thinking outside of my artistic brain when I'm standing in front of something trying to create,
yeah.
and that blank canvas in my generation of coming up was real. You
Yeah.
were facing that blank canvas, and there was something that would happen between the two of you. Now it's triangulated because
Yeah.
you're self-conscious to some degree or self-aware that you're being watched doing it.
Right.
And add in, I do public murals where people are talking to me all the time and I'm trying to capture it, and it becomes like, oh
Yeah.
wow. But it took me a while, but I'm getting there to where it's becoming more natural. But yeah, Picasso would say that someone searching for something is far more interesting than someone that's found something. When it's just me, historically, it's just been me and a giant wall and a paintbrush. Like that searching process, I loved it.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved that part because that's the facing the blank canvas, and any of those movies you see about like Jackson Pollock trying to figure out that point between before the charismatic drip paintings and after. That space is so juicy and amazing for an artist. And most people are just looking at their tiny little screen.
No, that's interesting. And so we've gained a lot through technology, but we've lost something as well, do you think? Would you?
I definitely think so. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not shy about saying it. And I think it's just different. I don't judge anyone for having been born after Legos became something that you turned a page and assembled, as opposed to opening a box and letting your imagination create whatever's there.
Yeah.
Um, like there's a difference there.
Yeah. That's a good
And
analogy.
yeah, I don't think to me, I try and stay in like, to me, that's like ew. Because my magic was dumping out the Legos and trying to make a Tyrannosaurus Rex or whatever I was
Yeah.
trying to make, usually something from Star Wars. And then now somebody else is having a very different experience. And I can't say that it's better or worse, but I love the experience that I got to have.
Well, I would say the creative process has been taken away with those new Lego toys. Because this is what you're going to make. You buy the box and you see what it looks
Hmm.
like, and it's more like, I guess, more like a puzzle. You're just trying to put it together in that order.
Yeah.
Whereas those just the multicolored bricks, you had to figure out how to put it all
Yeah, and
together.
that's the sad part about consumer culture.
Yeah,
That's the
one of
part
the
you
set.
can. Yeah. And being able to say like what does really nurture the human imagination and soul to expand and connect and be as alive and joyful as possible,
Wow.
and that's what I hope my work is about. And it's laborious. I mean, people are like constantly telling me ways that I could speed this up or go faster or make more money or whatever. And I'm like,
Right.
I am fairly certain I could do all those things. And thank you for sharing.
Good for you, man. I love that.
Yeah.
You've had some profound statements here today. I not that I wasn't expecting it, but we went in a direction that I had not intended, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah, yeah.
Murals became your thing primarily because you got early work doing those, whether it was a ceiling or a wall, and that kind of became your path, your lane.
Yeah. And
Uh,
at that point, I definitely was the most interesting thing to me was getting a paintbrush in my hand.
Interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to paint. I didn't really have a fully formed vision of like, there are genius artists that went there. I mean, Picasso, when he's 13, he was mastering all these things so that then he could go on when he was in his 20s and really just dive. I wasn't there yet in my 20s.
Yeah.
In my early 20s, I was like, okay, I need to do this more.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And it was natural because I just loved the challenge of walking in. I always joke, there's like a bathroom in Washington, D.C. that literally got smaller because I repainted it so many times before they came home. Like I got to be in that process, they
Yeah.
were away. So I had like a couple of weeks and I'd paint it one way and I'd be like, oh, hell no. And then I'd try it again. And I was trying to explore what that meant. So yeah, I loved all those pieces of it, and where they took me, I just get so excited. Like the next project would come along and be completely different. But I never did anything in the environment or conservation based or even really activist based. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
gay man who was in the 80s and 90s, and I just didn't go there with my art. I was being me out. I wasn't closeted or anything, but my art always went into that other part of the world. I didn't, and I think you have to stick with what's natural on that stuff. You can only force so much as an artist. You can
That's
definitely steer within parameters. It's like a boat on a river rather than like a train on rails. There's wiggle room, but I really believe there's a path because I now know everything was leading to meeting that bee and when I was ready to do it.
okay. So you mentioned meeting the bee.
Hmm.
I did a little research and I know the story you're referring to, I think.
Hmm.
But tell our listeners about how you met the bee.
Sure. Well, it was 2008. I was in my studio in Manhattan, tiny little place in the East Village. And I turned around and I was funny because I've been telling this story for a long time. This little bee flew in and landed on the middle of the rug. And I'm like, I'm not actually sure she flew in. She could have walked. I never saw her fly. That just occurred to me all these years later, like
Uh,
day before yesterday. But anyway, I turn around and there's this bee, honeybee, on the floor, smack dab in the center of the rug. And so I get down on the floor and I look at this little bee, and immediately I notice there's a cuteness that I had never seen before. And there was a fuzziness and the big eyes and the antenna. And I just connected with this little bee. I got out a magnifying glass and really studied. I mean, there was a cuteness factor. It was very puppy-like that relationship you have with a puppy that's like just, I don't know, like the perfect one that is like just gets your heart wrapped around it like in a second, and I had that experience. So I just hung out with this little bee for like 2.5 hours until she died, and she had only walked about an inch and a half, 2 inches. So I put her out in the backyard and I come back in and I start researching honeybees. And when I was hanging out with her, I did hear this voice that said, this is just about change, another form of change. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but um, I noticed it was super clear. I didn't know whether it was about the bee dying or death or me beginning a change with my life or what it was. But so I come in, I'm researching honeybees, and I immediately came across colony collapse disorder, CCD, it's called. You know a little bit about it.
yeah.
And it basically, for those that don't know, it was this massive die-off of bees going on all over the world. And it was a huge mystery in 2008. Like nobody knew why this was happening. And I was in the middle of New York City thinking, I haven't seen one article, not one headline about this. How is nobody talking about this giant, globally devastating issue? So that got me looking further, and I came across a behavior of the bees called altruistic suicide or altruistic self-removal from the hive.
Wow.
And this is if a bee feels sick, it's in the hive, it will exit and fly off into the abyss for the good of the hive. And that's where the
Interesting.
name of the project came from 7 years later. But what really the lightning bolt moment for me in that was that they take this drastic act because they're basically wired to understand that their health and their immune system is connected to the hive. It's not just based on their individual bee body. And I was like, oh my gosh, so is ours. But we don't act like it. And I later, as I thought about it, was like, we're really hardwired for choice. We're not hardwired for change, which
Yeah.
is part of our problem right now. And
Independence and
yeah, but we are the same as them because if you
right.
put a baby on the floor in the middle of the rug where the bee was and you just leave it there, it ain't surviving.
Right.
We need each other. And so I was suddenly walking around Manhattan like, oh my gosh, I'm so much more connected to these people than I ever thought. There was some paradigm shift happening in my brain. And this was years before the pandemic. I mean, decades. And so, which was going to teach us a lot about our collective immune system, or at least try to. So then I was just like hooked. I was obsessed. This paradigm shift began in my brain as an artist, like my of the connectedness of all things and all people, and this metaphor of the hive. And I became obsessed with bees. And I kept telling people, I'd love to do a mural about bees because I figured that was something I could offer. I have this skill. I could make them really big on a wall so people could see. And it was just that vague. So I just kept talking about them and telling people, I'm looking for a wall. I'd love to do a mural if anybody has one somewhere. And it took 7 years. I continued doing my normal work. And in 2014, late 2014, maybe, my friend Maura texted me, sent me an iPhone video of the side of a honey company in LaBelle, Florida. And it's about 30 feet high and about 110 feet long. And she says, Matt, Willey, you should paint bees on this building. I was like, you know what? I should paint bees on that building. I'm going to call them up. And old school, fifth generation beekeeping family. And I talked to Renee Pratt, who's the current family head of the business. And I tell her what I'd like to do. And she says, oh my gosh, we would love a mural of bees on this building. But just so you know, we have no money to pay you. LaBelle has no money. They're not going to raise money here to do this. And murals are illegal in the city of LaBelle. And and I said to her, okay, I am not the tagger Speedy. I am not Banksy, like zip in and zip out in the dark of night. Like I am so slow, it's ridiculous. The cops will totally have me, handcuffed before I get one wing painted.
Oh, that's
So
great.
we're gonna have to deal with that part. But I said, if you guys get the law, if you guys can get the law changed, I will figure out a way to deal with the money. And I do have a philosophy. I'm fine with money. Money is just a thing. It's just energy in my mind. But I do think that many amazing things don't happen because people immediately turn off the faucet of flow because they think there's no money over there. And so I try very hard not to do that, especially with my work with the good of the hive. And I I did that intuitively at that point. I was like, I'll just handle this. Also, I flippantly thought there's no way these people are going to call me back. Who's going to get the law changed? Or who's got time? Like
Yeah.
nobody's got time for this. Well, so we have a nice conversation, hang up the phone, and you may have guessed it, 2 months later, they called me up and said, okay, we got the law changed. When are you coming?
Oh, fantastic.
And coincidentally, at that point in that window of time, I had moved to Asheville, North
Oh,
Carolina,
okay.
and for a completely separate reason. And I had moved within 1 mile of Phyllis Stiles, the founder of Bee City USA. As we know, North Carolina's state insect is the honeybee. I
Yeah.
didn't know any of this. Burt's Bees was in North Carolina. I did not know any of this. So there I am, and I did what I did back in the day. I put up, except I did it online. I just put up a page and called this project The Good of the Hive and asked friends and family if they wanted to like donate a little something. And I raised $500, sort of like with a pat on the top of the head, like, oh, how cute. Like, and so I had gas money and I just went. I went on faith, got in my rusty Ford Ranger and went. And when I got there, these amazing things happened. Somebody put me up in their RV for free for 10 weeks.
Hmm.
Restaurants in town were giving me free food, free salad bar as much as I could eat. The coffee shop in town wouldn't let me pay for a cup of coffee or breakfast. I don't even eat breakfast, but they'd bring me breakfast. People started dropping off like jars of honey, local beekeepers that weren't the beekeepers that I was painting, whose wall I was painting on. And there'd be a post-it note. I'd come back and it'd say, sell this. You'd probably get $20. I love what you're doing. And all these experiences started happening while I was painting on the wall. So that old cartoon you might see in the New York, or you see it in movies, like you're in some city and there's something happening on the top of a building, whether it's somebody might jump or whatever it is, all these people start gathering and looking. And it was similar energy without the jumping or the negativity of that. But I was up on this ladder creating something. So I was noticing this. We're bringing attention to what I'm painting here by doing it, not just by the image I'm creating. And I would turn around and there would be the one that sticks with me, and I tell it all the time, is these two people were behind me and I couldn't hear what they were saying. I was up on a ladder, but one was like an 80-year-old, very conservative looking farmer. And then maybe a 19 or 20-year-old young woman with tattoos and piercings galore. And they were just standing facing the same direction, pointing and nodding in agreement. You could tell they were having this conversation. I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And that happened many, many times.
Yeah.
Cops had pulled over a guy who was speeding and they just like ditched the guy. And all of a sudden they've got their phones out because there was also a live beehive. And at one point many points I was painting, getting to know the bees. Now I have no background with bees other than intellectually at this point. I didn't hang out with bees. And so I was trying to paint with bees landing on me, landing on my brush, trying to see what that feels like. I was trying to get to know them. What it was doing was bringing people, and they were pulling out their cell phones and taking pictures. Look at this crazy guy painting with these bees all over him. And like, look at this mural beginning to happen. And it was just this great experience that way. And
Yeah.
someone in the town, and I think it was called the Swamp Cabbage Times. It was like this tiny newspaper. Like I know they have the Swamp Cabbage Festival. I don't
That's
know.
interesting. I've never that's
So
swamp
they write
cabbage.
this tiny little article. You think it's going to be in the like, grocery store or whatever, and somehow it hits Facebook, and people start donating from all over the country and as
Wow.
far as Greece in Europe.
Wow.
And I was like, this is interesting. And even more interesting was that honey companies were the biggest donors and beekeepers, but honey companies were
Hmm.
doing bigger chunks. And I was like, wait, I'm painting on a honey company, and a seeming competitor is literally sending me money to paint on that wall.
Wow.
That was new. And that fascinated me and fueled me. It was really just a magical experience. And I was beginning to learn from people about the bees, and the beekeepers were teaching me some things. And this large piece of art was beginning to happen. And so Maura was running a ride for hungry kids going across Florida. It's actually my dad was involved with it. That's how I met Maura. And she, whatever, all these little connections just led to this thing happening. And she wanted to make the mural site a water stop on their ride. And I was like, perfect, captive audience. We give them water, we give them a spiel about bees, and we're informing people. That was the
Hmm.
whole goal of this project, paint some bees and talk to people about what's going on with bees, period.
Yeah.
And it was just going to be one mural. And on that day, this guy, Travis Suit, he's an amazing human. If you can give a plug for Crossing for a Cure, he's now doing a giant CF thing where they paddleboard from like the Bahamas all the way to Florida and raising money for CF. But he happened to be doing this video of the ride, producing it or whatever. And he comes walking up to me with a honeybee perched on his shoulder. And he's like, this bee's telling me to come and talk to you. And like, of course, now I'm full on having conversations with bees, not just listening to them. So I'm like, really, what's the bee saying? And so we get into this conversation. And he just says to me at some point during that conversation, how many bees are in a healthy hive? And I had just learned from Renee days before that it was between 30 and 60,000. So I told him that. And he said, do you think you could paint 50,000 of them? And that was the second lightning bolt moment. After everything that was
Yeah.
happening, I was like, I'm going to see if I can do it.
And this is
And
all
that,
happening there in LaBelle
yeah,
because you
on
put
that first
yourself out
mural.
there You
Yeah.
were able to get $500 together and make the trip down, expecting nothing else.
Yeah. And we
And
raised over
all of
10
this,
grand. Yeah, we
oh,
ended up raising
that's
$10,000 for that
fantastic.
project. Yeah.
And all of this energy coming from everywhere. It's just such beautiful stories. I love the old man, the young girl. That such a vivid picture you painted of that. What a wonderful thing. And it does reflect the whole spirit behind the good of the hive,
Mm-hmm.
how
Mm-hmm.
bringing people together um, for a good purpose. So it's fantastic. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I mean, that was 52 projects ago. And
52. Wow.
52, I forget the exact breakdown, but I think 11 of them are installations. I count the installations. Um,
What do you
if,
mean by an installation? Is that
yeah, I did
different than a
the
mural?
first one was 193 hand painted bees on board that I
Oh.
installed across from the UN in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza
They're
in New
still
York.
outdoor public murals, but they're just installed
Yeah,
a different way.
they're more sculptural. They're like pieces that I zip tie together like a
Okay.
swarm of bees, and I do some laser engraved ones with gold leaf, like
Okay.
bee icons, and they swarm in and become a shape, and then they can leave. And I don't count all of those toward my 50,000, but
Yeah.
if they're
So
significant enough, I do.
these are not permanent, they're temporary. Is that another
Those are
different?
not permanent in the sense of place. They're
Yeah.
permanent in the sense of a
You can
solid thing
move.
was made.
You
Yeah.
can move it around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And you're working in other media besides paint, it sounds like as well.
Well, yes, I'm currently well, most everything I do is with paint, except for now I've gotten into creating a film about the
Right.
project and really what I have seen happen. Like that story with the young woman and the old farmer is a pinky nail of what I've experienced going into every type of neighborhood in the world. The idea with the good of the hive, the 50,000 is the number, like we said, in a healthy hive. So I'm painting toward health and solution. That's the energy of the project, but it's also completely and utterly inclusive. So I'm going to every type of neighborhood where bees and people exist.
Yeah. Which
So it
is
could be rural Africa, it can be Beverly Hills, it can be New York City, it can be, Nebraska. It just doesn't. And so, and I've worked with corporate, I've worked with NGOs, I've worked with just a school, I've done some not super private. I like to keep it as public as possible, but there have been a couple of pieces that I felt made sense. And we capture them in video and that kind of thing. Um, and it's the idea is when I'm done with the 50,000, I'm right at about almost 11,000 now
okay.
in 9 years. So the goal when I get to 50,000 would be that I've touched in every continent and all types of neighborhoods. That's really as
Yeah.
broad as it is. Yeah.
It's a global hive,
I mean,
not
we
just
are all connected, and
yeah.
any separation we feel is an illusion, that the beauty of this project really is that the bee is not bound by race, nationality, gender, political affiliation, religion, like none of the things that separate us.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
food systems and an animal that is historically created the vegetation and the landscape for our bodies to evolve. They're so much older than us.
Right.
So really, if we can bring bees and birds back to health, pollinators really, and birds back to a state of health, we will automatically be healthy
Yeah.
because they're so interconnected. So I love the idea of this. There's so many things I love about the bees, working with these tiny creatures that when you look closely at them, They're different. They're little fairies, they're little dragons, they're little magical, colorful beings, but you don't see them because they're zipping by so fast.
Right.
So there's this whole world happening around us and that is the metaphor. Like that's what I got from it from the beginning. What
Mm.
I'm offering is making them big so people can see them, like that echo of that experience where this tiny bee became big in my mind. I do that on walls so that other people can have that experience or hope to have that experience. But but what I get from it is that like that beauty of knowing like I'm aware of this entire thing going on all around us.
Yeah.
Like they give that to me because just when I'll be like, oh, I can't effing do, I mean, it's 100 degrees and I've done 10 hours. Like every intern that works for me ends up in bed with pneumonia because they can't keep up. It's like, it's just, it's hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
and you get a southern exposure wall and what do? You go to work. And so, but like that just when I'm about to give up, or like not, I'm never really about to give up, but when I just don't think I can go another minute, some bug will show up and literally start conversing with me.
That's
Like, dude, we
fantastic.
got this. This is not a problem. We're all good. It's just a blip of time. Time is different for insects. Don't think in those terms. You'll be in your bed asleep in air conditioning before you know it, And like
Right.
I'm like, okay, you're totally right. This is just temporary. And then I'm painting again.
Yeah.
And it's a relationship that is really, I feel lucky that I got to find it, you
Right.
know
Right.
because other people have it with cheetahs or chimpanzees or whatever they're but connecting with nature in some way, whether it's some people it's flowers and gardens and
Yeah.
all of that. Kim Bailey, who we should give a nod to about the
Yes.
Hendersonville mural, is monarchs. Her passion is monarch butterflies. And,
Right.
I know she would say, her life has been completely enriched by cultivating that relationship.
Yeah. Kim Bailey is here in Hendersonville, North Carolina, where I'm based, and she has milkweed farms, and she helped us connect. And she's doing some wonderful work there with the milkweed and advancing pollinator health. So thank you, Kim, for your work. Well,
Yeah,
let's talk
definitely.
about the mural here in Hendersonville. This is First of all, this is fascinating. I hope I haven't taken too much of your time because you took me some directions I had no idea we would go, and it's been beautiful. Let's get to the mural here in Hendersonville. Who commissioned the mural and for what purpose?
Yeah, this every mural I've done has some kind of story to it.
Okay,
And the
great.
Hendersonville one has to begin with the fact that they took the longest from first conversation to actually painting of any of the 50 projects.
Interesting.
They
We move slow here.
Kim was like, she was volunteering for Bee City USA. That was how I met her. And she was like, you got to come to Hendersonville. And she had me in front of the tree board back when I had no experience pitching this. I had no back other than the mural and labelle. I really didn't have much um, to
So this
show
was
for
one of
my
your
project.
earliest ones? Was this one of your earliest ones?
This was not because it took 4 years to
Oh, right.
do, but she was definitely one of the first people to jump on and be like, this idea rocks
Yeah.
and like let's do it. And she got me the meeting and was there sitting next to me with the tree board and I'm shaking in my boots like, Kim, I don't know what to tell these people. What am I supposed to tell these people? I have no background in this kind of thing, And it was really, I became such good friends with her because of our just perseverance on all this. They had trouble finding a wall. They couldn't decide which wall. And I've come to realize that is a key in the work. If somebody wants to do a project, if we have a wall, people can visualize it. It just took a while to get there. But the beauty of it was that the whole time Kim was talking about it and raising money and doing things like having little plant sales. And saying this is for this, and she was distilling or not distilling, but whatever it's called when coal becomes a diamond. She was like compressing the energy
Yeah.
around the idea of the good of the hive. And I barely knew how to tell the story in those days, much less. And so I was so grateful that people were helping me out with that. And Kim said something to me so profound when we got to them. Because I was like, this is 4 years. People have college degrees since we started talking about painting a wall, Kim, you know?
Right.
And she's like, but I will tell you, Matt, everyone in this community knows about the good of the hive and knows this is coming because of the footwork on the ground, grassroots, no pun intended, of plant sales and just a little booth at an event downtown or whatever it was, that that began to bring the community aspect into focus for me more clearly, and how much local communities do and can do to create change. So anyway, finally, the Hands-On Children's Museum in Hendersonville offered the canvas. And by the time they offered the canvas, Kim had done all the money locally to raise the money, grassroots. It wasn't coming from the city. It was all donations, private, um, and so we were ready. The two things came together.
Yeah.
And we were all of a sudden in COVID, which was a drag.
Yeah.
And that was really tricky. I started it, I did the hive at one point, and then it got too cold and it was winter because we tried to do it in the fall. And sometimes I underestimate, or especially in those days, I would think, oh, I can get that done. And one of the things about Hendersonville is so many people were interested in talking about it and hanging out with me. And that's part of the mission, is always talk to that little kid if they want to talk.
Interesting.
You don't shut them down or push them out of the way, or the old lady.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to just be a kid. But the whole idea was to create connection. So I underestimated how much extra time that takes. So I ended up, not finishing the mural and then coming back after I did a piece in the UK. But when I got back from that one in the UK, I went back and finished up doing the monarch. The real focus of that mural was an homage to the work that Kim is doing. It
Right.
has every stage of the monarch's progression from caterpillar to full butterfly, or
Yeah.
from egg to caterpillar to full butterfly. And so that became an important part of the project.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just the bees there.
Yeah.
Can you take us through each element of that mural?
When someone first approaches a mural for the good of the hive, I'm always hoping they might have seen one of the other murals. So I try
Okay.
and keep stylistically enough there's something similar, because I am not about save the honeybees. Like, I'm not pushing for that. I'm not, but I do see the connection between the way honeybees operate and what they have to teach us with their life in the hive. The bee to her hive is us to our world.
Yeah.
And I
Got it.
always want people to be seeing that when they see the Hendersonville mural. That's why the giant hive is on the corner,
Right.
with the queen and her golden crown there. It'll actually reflect in sunlight if you see it, at the right time of day. Then we knew we wanted to do the monarch life cycle, that whole thing. We did that and the milkweed, that I knew I wanted milkweed. So those were the two elements that we started with. And then everything else became, what flowers do I think are cool? A lot of the those white flowers, which are button bush. I needed to choose on this one. We had a lot of kids and community coming to paint petals of flowers.
Oh, okay.
So I knew I needed flowers that had a lot of petals. And so, and I liked the geometric shape of the circle with the spikes, and it fit with inviting the community. And so some of these decisions I make, especially down low, you can see in the mural that allowed for a lot of different people to come and put their hand on it. But I could also, go over it and bring it back to a flower. I can't just have massive people
Yeah.
And that's people just painting however they want on a project. So
Right. But you involved the
that,
community, got them actually
yeah,
painting a little bit. That's
yeah, we had
fantastic.
several days where with great photos of little girls dressed as butterflies painting a flower. And then I just added some other native species pollinators. The swallowtail is
Mhm.
on the echinacea or coneflower, and there is a leafcutter bee, sweat bee, and a bumblebee over to the left, if I remember right.
Yeah, I
And
probably didn't get a good shot of that.
yeah, and a lot of what I try and do with the work is I choose where I am, like, how do I explain this? So often I see murals where it is someone's style plastered up on a rectangle, which I love murals. I love muralists. I'm not bad mouthing anything with that. But my work, I try and have at least a couple of elements that integrated in with the building. So I
Mm.
often will have a bee landing on something specific, like a sill of a doorway, or honey dripping along that lands on the light fixture there that
Yeah,
then drips down further. So it becomes a part of the setting. And sometimes I play with that a little bit psychologically, and other times it's purely aesthetic, just to give the visual of integration and connectedness. Like the one in North Carolina at the Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, I have these two bees hovering over a dandelion, and they really do look like they're having a conversation about, do we think we can taste this? Or is it pesticided? Is there Roundup
oh,
on this? But it's on a concrete wall as well. There is nothing more man-made than a concrete wall, right? How are we taking care of their space? Are we working with them in it? Or are we just developing and
yeah,
saying bye, move on? Anyone who is going to do any large scale building or any of that, we need to be really mindful. I mean, one, the monarchs are suffering because their migration takes five generations of monarch to go from like Maine down to Mexico.
Hmm.
So they need places to stop and lay eggs, have caterpillars become butterflies, and keep going.
Interesting.
And when we develop a whole section that for 1 million years they've been flying there, and then it's no longer there, we don't even realize it, but boom. That's the care that we can take.
Yeah,
That's the stuff that we can be mindful of when we're putting concrete or a building somewhere. How much space are we giving to our bees or other pollinators? I'm never about negativity or any of that. I'm like, okay, we're here. We're all here. This is where we are. What do we do? How do we change? That's
yeah,
what the work of the Good of the Hive is about. And this mural, I think, exemplifies that. My whole thing with the Good of the Hive is that there's the piece of outreach of getting pollinators in the front of everybody's brain, and then telling this story about how we might let pollinators change us for the better.
Hmm.
But then there's also like the aspect of what I'm learning along the way, and how am I changing personally as an artist to try and help share what I'm learning to tell an even better story.
Yeah,
And Kim was integral in that with me, because she really helped me learn more about other pollinators and get me excited about them. Because I
right.
just had a super passionate experience with honeybee, and a lot of people do, because there is something about the honeybee, like the pictures of them in ancient Egypt. I mean, we go way back with these creatures, so it's deep.
What about the queen bee in this on your mural there? She looks like she's right in the center there on the corner.
Yeah, I like, one of the things I love about the honeybee hive is the fact that it is 93 to 97% female.
Mm.
And I think that's super important. I've got two nieces, and there are just things about the way the feminine, and I don't even say men or women, but like we are out of balance with the feminine and masculine currently.
I agree.
And the beehive is a great example of how amazingly run and efficient and caring and tough. They'll squash a wasp, they'll go and they'll sting and they'll do what they need to do. But most of the time, they're just trying to like grow their hive and take care of their young. And like,
Right.
I think that that aspect of the feminine within the hive speaks to me as well. You
That's
know,
interesting.
um, I just see how out of balance we are. So I don't put a queen in every mural, but I do put her usually perpendicular. I've a couple times I've put her laying an egg or whatever, but
Oh,
I give her a gold crown so that the kids can spot her, and I usually put her fort around her,
yeah. I
like
was
I did on
wondering.
that one.
I had noticed that it was like a halo or a crown or something.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very interesting about the femininity of the hive. I think I knew that from working on that documentary, but it kind of slipped out of my mind.
Hmm.
But then you go back to this sacrifice too that you started the conversation with about what colony collapse disorder was when it was what's happening is they're abandoning the hive because they don't want to spread this disease, I suppose. But there's
Yeah.
that sacrifice that women often make. Uh,
Yeah, and it's not, doesn't, I mean, I use the example because it's what came up and it's a truthful story, but it's not about like because you're sick going off and doing something super drastic as a human. It's about the understanding of the connectedness. Because we're humans, we're
got it.
not bees, but we can learn a lot from them. And
Right.
so, how would we make a choice to say just that adjustment, like we're talking about with the buildings or anything else or construction? Like, how do we just shift that focus from where we're at to being more aligned with what's around us?
Let's give the listeners the web address so that they
Yeah,
can
it's
go
thegoodofthehive.com.
thegoodofthehive.com. Check it out. It's a beautiful site. So you
Yeah,
can
and
see a
my
lot of his work.
Instagram is at the good of the hive.
Okay.
Facebook is at the good of the hive. But yeah, the film is really it's about a lot of what I just told you, the origin story, but with more of what's gone on in my head as I've been doing this work, how I see things as an artist. But it's an activist piece in that it's supposed to do just what the murals do.
Right.
And that's what's a little bit different about it that I can't really talk about. And I'm excited
Yeah.
to show people that, but it definitely goes into a series of projects where I learned a ton from people that, and it all centered around this connection through the bees. Somehow the bees brought some humans together to do something.
Right.
And that I'm just blown away every time I come away from another one of those. And I'm in production until probably late spring. Then we'll be in editing through the spring and summer of 2025 and
Yeah.
hoping by the fall we'll have a film.
Oh, fantastic. We look forward to seeing that when it
Yeah,
comes out.
yeah,
Well, this is fantastic. So much broader and deeper and richer than I expected. I'm not surprised by that. As I told you, that I had done a film about colony collapse disorder, and that was about let's try to find a solution to this and save the bees. And I think that's part of your mission, but yours is much broader than that. I've learned.
yeah. It's
There's
really
so
about the
many.
people. I'm
Yeah.
really about the people. And I love the bees and I love pollinators and all that. But it's like in German, there's 47 words for love,
All right.
where Americans, English, we have like one.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't love bees in the same way I love other things. I have this reverence for them and understand not just their importance, but their ability to change the world. because they do it every single day. It's happening all around us. And when you really key in and see that, you can't unsee that. And it's like, why are we stopping them in a world that we need to heal as fast as possible?
Yeah.
We just need to stop stopping them, and like let them thrive, and we will see the support. The birds, what do birds eat?
Yeah.
And they need to eat healthy pollinators. I'm blessed to get to do this work. I honestly, I thought I was going to do one mural in LaBelle, Florida. And all of a sudden I've got so much international interest that I could book out 10 years right now if I wanted to. And I'm not right now, but it's just been exciting. Yeah.
Well, congratulations to you.
It's great talking to you.
You too.
Really appreciate it.
This has been so inspiring. Good luck to you. Safe travels. Look forward to hearing and seeing more from you.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on Do Tell, a storytelling podcast. We hope you were inspired by the stories today's guests shared with us. Please tell all your friends and acquaintances about our series offering great stories from great storytellers in all art forms and media. We are on a mission to create communities and bridge divides with these inspiring and motivational tales. Thanks so much to our sponsor, the Henderson County Tourism Development Authority, based in Hendersonville, North Carolina, a picturesque mountain town tucked away in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where every visit is not just an adventure-filled sightseeing experience, but an immersion into the heart of Southern charm. For more info, check out their website at visithendersonvillenc.org. Thanks also to the nonprofit STEEP Incorporated, STEAP, which stands for Storytelling, Education, and Arts Programs. STEEP's motto is Connecting Communities with Stories, and they are dedicated to creating programs that widen social awareness and cultural appreciation across diverse communities. Learn more about STEEP at steep.net. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast and help us continue to connect those communities.